Hello, and welcome to En Route. This is a podcast about journeys. My name is Dennis Sanders, and I'm your host. Well, today we're going to talk about collapse. Or actually, I think that the Germans, or at least the German language, sometimes has so many interesting words about it. Usually there are about these 18-syllable words that mean something. We know about Schadenfreude and Gemeinschaft. I'm thinking I got that one wrong. The one that I want to talk about today is Götterdämmerung. And that is German, of course. It's denoting the collapse, usually of a regime, and that's marked by violence and disorder. The word kind of came into being really because it's the title of the fourth and last of Wagner's Ring Cycles. So usually when we want to talk about kind of calamity or a catastrophe, a cataclysm or something, you can use the word Götterdämmerung. And I want to use that's kind of the name of this podcast or this episode, because I want to talk a little bit about Götterdämmerung in our own society in America. Is that happening? This was prompted actually by an article by Douthat from the New York Times. He wrote an article this past week that is entitled, "Are We Destined for a Trump Coup in 2024? And so he's talking a lot about how there are certain people that kind of catastrophize and look that there is a coming coup, some type of disaster heading our way that Donald Trump is going to engineer. And, it could be 2024, but it could also be a lot sooner. He tends to think that people are being a little overheated. And I don't always know what to think. I know sometimes I think there are people that do, I think, go a little bit crazy about stuff like this. But it's also hard to dismiss it. And I think it's harder to dismiss it, especially in light of what happened on January 6th. The insurrection, if it hasn't shaken us to our core, it should have. Something like this has not happened before, or at least it has not happened in centuries to this extent. There have been other cases where people have entered the Capitol and caused havoc. I'm very mindful of when some Puerto Rican terrorists kind of came in. I think on the floor, it was the floor of the House, and ended up shooting. But nothing really to the scale of what happened on January 6th of 2021. That was something that was unheard of. And, some people think, is this a dress rehearsal for something bigger? And I don't know. I can't say that this could be just a one-off, but I don't know. And I think especially after that, if there were any doubts about this president or the former president's belief in and trust in democracy and the rule of law, that it was not present, it was very clear on that day what happened. So Douthat doesn't think that something like this is going to happen. And he also looks at, the Democrats in some of the ways that they have dropped the ball. It's And also some of the ways that Trump has not necessarily been the smartest. He's not the evil genius, Bond style person. Except I think that he is probably a lot smarter than we give him credit. He is not book smart. But I think he is smart, and sometimes I do think he is playing three-dimensional chess, just not in the way that we think he is. Because what I think that he is trying to do is really not about... He's not trying to come through the front door, I think that's what I'm trying to get at. I think he's trying to come in through the window. And I think that he's trying to sow doubt. It's not about whether he is telling a lie. He's told thousands of lies, but the point here is not that he wants to tell the lie as much as he wants to confuse people and sow distrust. And I think the big lie that everyone talks about, that he tries to say that Joe Biden has stolen the election, that he was the rightful winner, is not as much about trying to lie as much as it is, I think, to sow doubt in our elections. I think that the thing is, let's say in 2024 we have an election that ends up somewhat similar to 2020, where mail-in ballots make a difference. And let's say that Biden wins, if he runs in 2024. You already then have a ready-made electorate, at least half of the electorate, that will automatically not believe that. They will not concede defeat. And when that happens, then you have basically said that representative democracy is in trouble. Because if you can't trust or you can't believe that the opponent that you may not like can win, and win fairly, then can you really have the change in power? Can you really have the continuity of government? And I think that that's what Trump's trying to do. As I said, I think he's trying to go in through the window, the kitchen window, and I think what he's trying to do is to delegitimize our system of elections, so that we don't trust each other. And basically what he is trying to do, and he is setting himself up as, is the arbiter of truth. That truth depends on him, which unfortunately is very much how authoritarian societies are ruled. Because the truth doesn't lie independent of a leader. Truth is basically the jurisdiction of, it belongs to the leader. So, as you can see, I'm a little hesitant to totally give in to Douthat's belief, though I don't know if we're going to necessarily have a coup. The coup may not be what we're expecting. It could be something totally different, but whatever it is, it's the thing that would happen, that it would weaken, if not destroy, American democracy. And I don't know if that will happen. I pray to God that it doesn't. But I think that that's what they're trying to do. Charen, who writes for the Bulwark, has her own podcast, Beg to Differ, has talked about the fact that, and she begins first with the whole being of Liz Cheney being kicked out and replaced by Elise Stefanik. And basically, that's a sign that the party is no longer going to be bound by law or custom. And she reminds people that in 2020, many of the Republican office holders, many, and I would add many judges, and that includes Mike Pence, basically held the line. They were not interested in trying to falsify anything. They were not trying to pretend that there was fraud. But we can't trust that that's going to happen again 4 years from now. As she says, the party has been schooled since then. The base believes basically the lies that have been perpetrated. And she notes, and she basically says that in 2024, and she quotes her colleague Amanda Carpenter, would be that instead of stopping the steal, it will be to steal it back. And the base itself does really believe a lot of these lies. 2/3 and to 3/4 of some Republicans basically continue to say that Joe Biden was illegitimate. He's illegitimate. 60% say that the election was stolen from Trump. When many of these people are asked who is the president right now, most Republicans are going to say it's Trump. That is disturbing because what it's saying is that the rank and file of the GOP is in some ways not in touch with reality, which in some ways mirrors former President Trump. And I've been listening. I have, the book isn't out yet. I hope to read it soon. But there have been Jonathan Rauch, who works at the Brookings Institution, has this new book out called The Constitution of Knowledge. He has been doing the kind of podcast circuit. And one of the things that he says I think is important in a democracy is to really believe, obviously, in truth, in reality. When you have people who have no longer have hold of reality, when they kind of have their own stories, their own beliefs, democracy is in danger. And right now, we already have one political party that in many ways doesn't have hold on reality. And I think that's dangerous. Because if they don't see the truth, if they basically have their own truth, then that works to delegitimize the rest of the system. Because the only reason that the system continues is because of trust. We trust in that system. We trust that someone has, if they have lost, we trust that the other person has won and that they will govern fairly. When you don't have that trust, when you don't have people based in any sense of reality, you're in trouble. And then there's also the talk about violence. And David French brought this up recently that, and he says here, and I quote, if there is a single lesson that we can take from January 6th, it's quite simply that when you tell tens of millions of Americans that one political party is trying to steal an election, then some subset of those Americans will act like a party is stealing an election. They'll do something about it. And, that's the thing also that frightens me or concerns me, actually, about this belief that Trump will be reinstated in August. What if someone out there thinks that their way to do that is to commit some sort of violence? I don't know. I'm not suggesting or encouraging that or anything. But the fact is, if you keep telling people that the former President Trump is going to be reinstated when that's not the case, someone's going to try to make that a reality. And so, what do we do here? And I don't know. I don't know. How do we try to prevent what could be a slow motion disaster that we're seeing ahead of us? I think that there are lots of people that act as if there is nothing that we can do. That we see this train wreck happening and all we can do is watch it. But that would be wrong. If we're seeing something that is going to happen, then we need to do whatever we can to stop it. We at least have to try. Are we headed towards a coup? I don't think so. Are we headed towards collapse? That, I think, is possible. I don't know what that could look like. I don't know that there's going to be anything happening after January 6th. What I do know is that former President Trump and many people within the GOP are engaged in a dangerous game. And at some point, something's going to happen if we don't find a way to stop it. I'm concerned about the Democrats because they talk a lot about the danger, but they don't seem to act on it. So I don't know what to do with that. There doesn't seem to be a lot of original thinking about how to stop the oncoming train. Which leads me to this other article, which in some ways has nothing to do with this kind of talk about collapse, and it has everything to do with it. First, I have to kind of talk about one of the TV show that I'm obsessing over at the moment is For All Mankind. That is on Apple Plus, and for those of you who haven't watched the series or don't know what it's about, For All Mankind is kind of a science fiction, but it's an alternate history. So instead of the Neil Armstrong and Apollo 11 going to the moon first, it's the Soviets that get to the moon first. And so this alternate reality is basically a place where the space race hasn't ended. And it's a fascinating look at what, in some ways, because I'm someone that loves to follow I'm interested in the space program, and I'm interested in kind of the questions of why we haven't gone back to the moon. And there's an article I wrote about this. Will be in the show notes. But it kind of talks about, the story talks about the fact of what would society look like had we kept up in the space race. And this alternate America has a moon base. There is a moon base there. The shuttle program is alive and kicking. In season 2, and I should go back a second, is that the first season deals with the years between 1969 and 1974. The second season deals with the 1980s, 1983. And it's fascinating because, there are a whole fleet of shuttles that, do things in low Earth orbit, but also go to the moon. There's a second generation of space shuttles that are coming out. All of this has brought some changes on Earth. Electric cars are there far sooner than they are here. The third season, which has not come out yet, that won't come out until 2022, but There's a teaser at the end of the second season that shows someone, a human, on Mars. So we know that there's going to be some type of base or something on Mars. All of this is happening. It's a fascinating look about, in some ways, what could have been. What could have been had we kept up the space race? What could have been had we still had that drive to improve upon ourselves, to be better, to strive? I bring that up because there is, I read an essay, and it's actually now, the essay is actually a year old, by Marc Andreesen. And for those of you who don't know, Marc Andreesen was the guy, if you remember Netscape, the old browser from the 90s, he was the one that created it. He's now a venture capitalist. But he talks about the fact of how the coronavirus really showed how the institutional failures that took place because of the coronavirus kind of revealed some of these institutional failures. And he really states the point that, we want to blame a party or blame this government. But the fact is that everyone failed. It doesn't matter who they were, what country, what state. Everyone failed. And, he talks about the fact that, part of the problem is foresight. But the other part is that we didn't really do anything in advance. We didn't build, is what he gets at. We didn't during the pandemic have enough ventilators. We didn't have enough ICU beds. We didn't have enough surgical masks or all of that. There were just a lot of things that we didn't do. We didn't build. We didn't build institutions. We didn't build actual infrastructure. We just did not build. And he thinks that, what he saw is in our day and age is that we just aren't that interested in building, in doing things, the new things, the flying cars, as we like to say. That we aren't really educating the populace as much as we want to. We are not doing much in manufacturing. Just a lot of things, and that what he sees there is a sense of complacency, a smug complacency that we're fine, don't really need to do anything, and that this is just common throughout Western societies, but especially here in America. Just kind of over and over again. He talks, the one that I was interested in was, of course, transportation. He asks, why aren't there supersonic aircraft or drones or monorails or high-speed rail? And, of course, the flying cars. Now, of course, there is some things happening with supersonic aircraft. If you are aware of Boom Supersonic, hopefully they will be having something out by the end of the decade. But everything else we haven't really done. And again, there is a lot of complacency. There's no sense of trying to improve, no sense of trying to think outside the box. We're just kind of pleased with what we have. And even something of what we have, we don't necessarily want. The big thing right now as we're talking about infrastructure is, which I find fascinating, because the fact is, as much as we talk about the need for infrastructure and how much we want infrastructure, the reality is we don't want it. I mean, we talk a little bit about the Keystone XL pipeline, some other pipelines, and I understand some of the things that were the reasons people are against it, the environmental concerns, some of the indigenous concerns. But I felt like, especially within some movements, there isn't any kind of desire of trying to create a better mousetrap. How can we transport fuel safely? How can we do it in ways that doesn't harm people? There are some places where there is a need for a pipeline because the older pipelines are falling apart, but there's this desire you can't build them because that means that we're talking about fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are bad. And so the answer then is just no. And there's no desire to either try to build a better mousetrap, or if we think that fossil fuels are so bad that we have to go towards other sources, to even push for harder for electric infrastructure and more electric cars. You see this especially when it comes to transportation, in that neither side wants to build certain transportation because it goes against their beliefs. I have never understood conservatives that seem to just have this fear of trains. Whenever there's a talk about high-speed rail, it's just kind of a lot of people on the right just roll their eyes and say that it's a waste of time. But somehow it hasn't been a waste of time in Germany or Japan or China. There are lots of other countries around the world that have been investing in high-speed rail. It has not been a waste. So why do we think that it will be a waste here? On the other end, then, you have liberals who just detest the interstate highway system, which I think is one of the greatest kind of engineering and infrastructure feats ever done. Now, the reasoning, there are legitimate complaints. I think that there is, and people have said, a history of racism. And, I've shared here in Minnesota, where I've lived for 25 years, a lot of minority neighborhoods were torn down to make way for freeways. Because, of course, they were the people that were the weakest. They were the ones that weren't going to fight back, or at least didn't have enough power to fight back. That happened, again, here in St. Paul with Interstate 94 as it was going through. It went through an area in the western part of the city that was an African-American neighborhood. And basically lots of African-Americans were kicked out of their homes for this freeway to come through. But there seems to be this no desire to think about that basically freeways are just bad. In fact, I remember reading a planner that considered freeways scars. There's no desire of how to make freeways better. Because the fact of the matter is, you're going to have to find some way of getting things, especially even within metro areas. Having everything be a boulevard is not going to make it any better. You're going to have a lot of people that need to get from A to B in some fair amount of time. There's no thought of how we can make things better, how we can improve freeways so that they are not as destructive. There's just this sense of no, this doesn't work, or this is stupid, and we're just so full of ourselves that we're not willing to be better, to try better, because we think that we have arrived. And Andreesen is really talking about the fact that we need to get back into a belief of building. And I think that he's right. I think that sense of building is a sense of desire of and scrappiness, that you want to do more, you want to be more, you just don't want to be satisfied with what you have because you think that there is something out there that's better, that you can build a better hospital, you can build a better school, a better transportation system, that you can build better housing, and you can build better cities. And we don't have that. And so what does this have to do with what I was talking about earlier? There's been a lot of talk about basically what they think Trump is going to do in 2024, in that democracy is threatened. But we're not trying to think about how we can build things better. How can we make a better democracy? How can we make a better society? What are the things that we need to do that are better? And not just think that we are that much, that we know it all. Our political parties in many ways are trying to answer questions for the 20th century, but not for the 21st. I've been involved, and there's been a lot of talk of trying to involve either third party or at least a faction within the GOP that can counter Trumpism. But it's not going to work if it does is that it's basically that we want it to be the party that it was in 2015. Because for all as bad as Trump is, he at least showed us that what we were offering wasn't working. And so how can we be better? And maybe that's the problem, because the belief in wanting to be better means that you're going to have to change. And you're going to have to change how you think. You're going to have to change what you believe sometimes. And that's scary. It's far easier to just sit back and believe what you always believed and do what you always did, because that's what you did. But I don't think that that's going to change. And so, I don't know. Are we here in America headed towards a Götterdämmerung? I don't know. I think that the possibility is far more present now than it was even during the time that Trump was in office. I think that January 6th changed everything. But we have to have a belief that we can have a better society. We have to believe that we are willing to change, not for change's sake, but change for the sake of democracy. Because if we are just so satisfied with who we are, if we are just believing that this is inevitable, then it will be inevitable. Trump will find some way of returning to power. He will find some way of delegitimizing America even more. I think we are at an inflection point. We can be better. We can demand to be a better nation. Or we can just sit back and let the Götterdämmerung happen. But if it happens, then there is no going back. The old regime will have collapsed, and violence and disorder will rule. And we will wish that we had made the changes when we had the chance. Are we headed for a coup? I don't think so. Are we headed towards collapse? We might be. And on that cheery note, I want to say thank you for listening to this episode. Please consider leaving a review or a rating on whatever platform you listen to. And please consider doing that. It's helpful for us to know who's listening. It's helpful for us to know how we can be better. And it's also helpful for us, for me and for others, to find this podcast. Also, if you feel like leaving a tip, to help support this podcast, please consider doing so. There is a link in the show notes. And thank you in advance for your donations. So that's it for this week. Hopefully soon we will have another interview coming up. Until then, take care, everyone, and Godspeed.